Greetings, everyone! It's the weekend, and we hope you're having a fantastic time. If you've missed out on some of the best stories this week, don't worry, we've prepared an exclusive compilation just for you. So grab your favorite snacks, sit back, and get ready for a thrilling ride through the most captivating tales of the week. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so that you never miss out on these exciting stories in the future. We are committed to keeping you entertained and engaged week after week. And hey, if you come across a story that really steals your heart, don't forget to leave a timestamp in the comments. That way others can dive right into that particular moment and share the joy with you. So without further ado, let's kick off this weekend with an unforgettable collection of stories that will leave you smiling, gasping, and eagerly waiting for more. What's the biggest double life you've ever personally seen revealed? Story 1. I served in the Navy from 1985 to 2005. While in my first squadron from 1985 to 1989, we were away from home often, either on short detachments of 2 to 5 weeks or 6-month deployments. During one period when we were at home for a while, I was on watch in the duty office after hours. Me and another guy just had to man the office, answer the phone, and monitor the guys on watch down in the hangar bay. Shortly after our watch started, we got a phone call from the wife of someone in our squadron. She was asking us when the squadron would be back from detachment. I asked the other guy if he knew about anybody out on debt, and he just looked at me funny. I told her we didn't currently have anyone on debt. We've all been back home for a couple months. She insisted her husband had been out on debt for 3 weeks and needed to know when he was coming home. I assured her nobody was on debt and told her that I had seen her husband earlier that day at work. She just hung up after that. Turns out the guy was telling his wife he was out on debt and shacking up with his girlfriend for a few weeks. She called the commanding officer to find out when her husband had been part of a detachment and found out he'd done it many times over the previous couple years. Infidelity is officially against the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It didn't turn out well for him. As pointed out, it's adultery, not infidelity. That is against the UCMJ, and there does, in fact, have to be evidence or a confession of actual intercourse. In this case, the guy admitted to everything. He went to captain's mast. I don't remember exactly what his punishment was, though. I don't think he got kicked out, probably a reduction in pay grade, restriction for several months, and half pay for several months. And a divorce, I'm sure. Additionally, I had no idea what he was doing at the time his wife called. I thought maybe she was pranking me out of something. I probably still wouldn't have covered for him, as some have suggested. He didn't deserve that anyway, and screw anybody saying I should have helped him get away with that stuff. I'm pretty confident my dad has told me the exact same story, who was also in the Navy for the same time frame. He told me that on another occasion, different guy I believe, the squadron met up for a party, and this guy's wife came up to my dad. She said she had a bone to pick with him because my dad kept putting this guy on to fly nights on Fridays and weekends. My dad worked in Skeds at the time. She confronted him pretty aggressively, and my dad told her he hasn't been scheduling him for weekends, and that this guy had been sniffing out Friday to Sunday. She turned ghostly white, changed her tone, and left the party. My dad pieced together what had happened right after the confrontation. My dad also knew someone in his squadron who cheated on his wife when they would get deployed. Sadly, the wife didn't find out until OSI showed at her door one day. Story 2. So when I first left home in my late teens, I shared a big house, I think over 6 bedrooms, with a close friend, his brother, and some other randos. Think frat house, except no college or university. Splitting the expenses worked out pretty well, so one of the guys worked at a port in customs or something. He had a uniform and ID, etc., left for work at the same time every morning, and hung out with us after work. He was always down for attending social events with us, and most of us liked him. Fast forward about a year, and he starts telling us about how he can get us discounted TVs and other merchandise from the port. Unclaimed or seized property that apparently no one sweats about if just a few items go astray. Everyone gave it a pass, as it seems sketchy. Then one day we come home to one of our housemates in shock and bawling like a baby. Turns out, not only did he give the guy his life savings, he also gave him money borrowed from his dad. The customs guy had said he could get him a new car cheap. The long, long con. Turns out the guy doesn't work at the port, the name he gave us doesn't exist, and we have no idea how he spent his days or came up with his share of the rent and bills. Still creeps me out a little knowing I lived with a stranger for so long. I lived in a house just like that, with a guy who said his parents were recently deceased. He cried about them a lot. Not really a double life, but when we kicked him out, his parents came and helped him move his stuff out. I had a friend who did something similar. He worked abroad at a bar for the summer and lived with two Norwegian guys who were doing the same. They were due to move out the last day of the season and each go home, but a week early he came back to find that they had left, and they'd taken everything of value he owned. He went to their workplaces to try and find out more, but the people there had never heard of them, and they didn't move in the same circles, so he was never able to find out more. Upon talking about it recently, he said that he doesn't even know if they were Norwegian. Not that it matters, but he strongly suspected everything he knew about them was a complete lie. Names, home stories, the lot. Story 3. So my brother was married to the same gal for 21 years. Around year 19, it was apparent my sister-in-law wasn't happy and was planning to move on, until my brother came down with cancer. She wouldn't leave him while undergoing chemotherapy and surgeries, but a leave was inevitable. So my brother is home one day, and my sister-in-law is at the gym. The SWAT team breaks down the door, throws my brother on the ground, handcuffed him, and held him at gunpoint. They were looking for my sister-in-law to arrest her for CP, CR, endangering children, etc. SWAT ended up arresting her at the gym while my brother was being held at the house. Skip some details, and it came out my sister-in-law was having several affairs and is now serving 25 years in state prison as she confessed to the CP, CR, and endangering. We also found out she was doing it with the family dog by pictures found on her personal computer. She was the daughter-in-law my mother had always wished for, and no one knew she was living this double life for the last 2 years before she went to prison. Update, obviously ripped my inbox. I wanted to also say thank you to the unbelievable number of you people who sent me private messages with concern and advice regarding my nieces, because you'd been abused yourself. You are the true heroes to feel the compassion and compulsion to write to me and to share your stories. How did you and your family react when you found out? This is freaking crazy. Well, sister-in-law was also a preschool teacher, so the initial shock pretty quickly turned to an, oh my god, how deep will this run, sort of thing. My brother stayed up all night to be at the daycare where she worked when it opened to talk to the director personally, so when it hit the news, the daycare wasn't blindsided. Turned out the CP she was sharing were pics she was taking of their daughters. The R charge was added after they went through her computer and phone, found out that she was R-ing her own daughter and then sending videos over the internet. This came out at the same time we learned about the family dog. My brother is still in therapy, and my mother cried for weeks. The story made the national news. Story 4. I worked with this guy once who was known for his stories. No matter how loose the connection was, he'd find a way to turn anything into a personal anecdote of a thing he'd seen or done before. All of them were interesting the first time. He'd lived an interesting life, grown up in America, moved to Australia in his early 20s, worked in a lot of really cool places over the years. But it wasn't long before he started repeating the same stories over and over again. I worked with him for just over 3 years, so it got pretty ridiculous. We knew how he'd met his wife, all the obscure things he owned, his pets, his kids. We knew every detail of his life. It became a bit of an in-joke within the office about how the guy never shut up. Then one day he didn't come in. He had passed away of a heart attack. The whole office was at a loss, especially our little department, which had about 8 people in it, including him. When it came to his funeral, our little group took the afternoon off and attended. And that's how we found out none of his stories were true. He'd grown up locally. His family wasn't at all who we thought they were. None of his old jobs had happened. Everything we'd known about him had just been made up. The most interesting thing for me was that at one point, our boss needed someone to head to China to double-check something in person at one of our company's factories. When the usual choices couldn't do it, he was picked. It seemed like a no-brainer, since he was regularly going to and from America to visit family and had traveled a lot on his other jobs. We now think that may have been his first time overseas. How bizarre. Did it change how you view him at all? Like, if you had found out some other way that didn't involve him passing away, do you think you would still consider him a friend? My ex was a pathological liar, and I feel like this sometimes. Did I even know him? Does he even count as my boyfriend? Because the guy I thought I was dating technically never existed. Story 5. Well, this is a salient question to stumble on today. Nutshell background, about 7 years ago, my brother was struggling with addiction, using almost any and everything, though alcohol was the DOC, drug of choice. We have a really long family history of alcohol use disorders. He dropped out of school and spent a few years bouncing around treatment centers and sober living houses. 3 years ago, he decided to move back, about 2 hours away from my parents' house, and get back into school. At this point, he's a lot older than the kids in his classes, and socializing is hard, so he would come up to see the parents every Friday, Saturday, Sunday. He decided to go for a chemistry degree. Every semester, talking about his specific classes, the content of them, etc. He knew the class times, professors, talked about teaching styles, and like clockwork, brought his dog to my parents for finals week twice a year so he could study without distraction. My entire family came from all across the country for his graduation ceremony on Friday. We were all bursting with pride and excitement because my brother had just done what we all thought was impossible and graduated. Pre-ceremony, none of us could find his name in the book. Then we couldn't find him walking among the students. About 30 minutes into the ceremony, I got a call from him. He was drunk. Turns out he never enrolled back into school. He just moved back, conned my parents into paying rent and utilities for 3 years, and spent 4 days a week boozing, gaming, and sleeping. No one knew this was going on. He invested so much into this double life that he had his whole family and all his friends fooled. We're not sure what the next steps are. My husband and I are going to help my parents pack up his place tomorrow. It's hard to find hope with the level of deceit that went into his latest stint. He's hurt so many people on this path. But he's my brother, and I love him nonetheless. Here's to a brighter tomorrow. Thanks for letting me word vomit and process this a bit more. Story 6. My sister-in-law had a second child. She was still married, but separated from her husband because she caught him cheating. The man with whom she had the baby was her father's old prodigy, who was also married with a couple of kids. This all took place in China, while the one-child policy was in full effect. So, to her parents, the separation and affair were secret up until she had a baby. Once they were looped in, they helped her to maintain the lies because, face. From her ex-husband's perspective, the child and the affair were secret. From the perspective of his family, with whom she remained in touch, the separation, affair, and baby were secret. This was complicated by the fact that they shared custody of their first kid. In fact, they pretended they were still living together for years. So the older kid was warned not to mention his brother to his father while spending plenty of time with both. It was all a secret from most, but not all of their close family, that is, cousins, aunts, and uncles, and then there was the prodigy's family, and really the rest of the outside world, for whom there was no separation, no affair, and certainly no kid. That included the government. I'm not even sure how that worked. She wasn't living another life. She was living fractals of lives within lives. Just try to imagine the logistics of getting your non-existent kid to school under a false identity, in time to pick up your older kid, who was waiting with your secret lover so that he could get back to his real family, and you and your kid could meet up with your cheating ex-husband so that you could all drive together to lunch with family from both sides, doing your best impression of a perfect platonic family who had come straight from a shared loving home, while being careful that neither you nor your older boy mentioned to anyone that you have to pick up your other son from school soon. Now I've got a headache. Story 7. Guy I used to work with, he lived in a small country town with his wife and 3 kids. When he was fired from his job, where I worked, he could only find something at his level in the big city 2 hours away. So he would go to work in the city Monday to Friday and home to his wife and kids on the weekends. This went on for years. It came out about 5 years into the arrangement that he wasn't living in the small crappy city apartment as he said, he was living with his girlfriend and their 2 kids. So he had a wife and 3 kids and a girlfriend with 2 kids, all his. Apparently the girlfriend knew about the wife, but the wife had no idea about the girlfriend. And his 3 country kids had 2 younger siblings that they knew nothing about. It of course blew up spectacularly. The wife kicked him out and he went to live with the girlfriend. 6 months later, she was sick of him and kicked him to the curb too. So now he pays child support for 5 kids to 2 different women and is actually living in that small crappy apartment. The balls on him must have been huge. I mean, it was in the city, not the little country town, but the city isn't that big. Eventually someone who knew him, his wife, his kids, was going to run into him with the girlfriend, or in a place he isn't supposed to be, or just something. I actually can't remember how he got outed. I think the wife went to visit the small crappy apartment and found the other woman there. I got my info through a small scuttlebutt, so I could be wrong. Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of this video and have a wonderful day. Story 8. Not exactly a double life, but my cousin was a secret for 4 years. My uncle was 21, and he and his girlfriend had a baby without telling anyone in our large, very nosy family. No one suspected a thing, and they went on dating. When I was 8 and their daughter was 4, her adoptive parents passed away in a fire and left in their will that they wanted her to go back to her biological parents. My uncle and his girlfriend sincerely regretted giving their daughter up, and so they were thrilled. Everyone just went with the fact that they were essentially keeping a secret child for 4 years and were pretty much okay with it. My cousin is 14 now, and she has 2 full siblings, and my aunt and uncle are great parents. Every now and again, someone brings up the situation, but it's pretty much just laughed off. I do find it a little odd, though. This is what I understand of the story. I don't know any more than what my mom told me, and the few things my cousin has said, so I don't know how the adoption worked, really. Also, when I said they laugh about it, they don't laugh about the tragedy of my cousin losing her adoptive parents. They laugh about how none of them thought to question why my uncle was acting so odd, over losing a child and all. Currently, my cousin doesn't seem to be screwed over the situation, but it'll be something she has to deal with when she's a bit older. Aside from the little girl tragically losing her adoptive parents at 4 years old, this ended up being a sweet story. Fortunate stroke of serendipity, except for, those people passing away in the fire. Story 9. My family hosted a number of exchange students while we were growing up. We hosted about 7 high school students over the course of my childhood. Each stayed for a year in our house, attended high school in our town, etc. One girl, Irina, from Russia, came to us no differently than any of the other students had, through the AFS program. To be a student through AFS meant you had to fill out an application, be 17 to 18 years old, be attending high school in your home country, whatever. So Irina arrives as our exchange student. She goes to high school in our small hometown on Cod, Massachusetts, but at Christmas time she says she has to go home to Russia because her mother was extremely sick. Going home during the exchange year is really unusual, really rare. So, okay, fine. She's going to Russia for the Christmas break. No big deal. She'll be back in January. Except she never comes back. AFS can't find her. We don't know where she is, if she made it to Russia, if she's hurt, nothing. And we're terrified because we are her host family during this year, and we always took the students in like family. Anyways, she's gone. Maybe 3 months later, my mom is driving through our tiny town, again, middle of nowhere, Cape Cod, and she sees Irina with what looks like her mom and some other kids. Turns out Irina has graduated high school in Russia already, was like 25, with children, and had posed as an exchange student so she could case the place before bringing the rest of her family. Can you imagine being a 25-year-old mom and going to classes every day with 17-year-olds pretending to be a teen? Sounds like a wacky movie. Story 10. My grandmother passed away a couple years ago. While going through her house, my family found a box with my grandfather's name on it in his handwriting. My grandfather passed before I was born. It was taped closed, and the dust on it suggested it hadn't ever been opened. Inside, my family found newspaper clippings and other documents. Turns out that in the early 1900s, my grandfather took a road trip with friends to see the ocean. During their time at the beach, their car was stolen. They decided to stay a while. Being in their late teens and out of school, they decided to earn some money and have a good time. My grandfather met a Mexican girl and married her within the course of a month. There was an article on vehicle theft, as well as another on marriage and a marriage certificate. We could never find information on what happened next. We don't even rightly know if they married for love, to get her citizenship, if they had kids, or even if he was legally divorced when he married my grandmother in the 1930s. We don't think my grandmother knew. We did find out her first wife returned to Mexico. She did have children who say they don't think their mom had kids before she remarried. We sent them copies of the documents we found, and they were as flabbergasted as we were. Story 11. There was one dad in our mother's group that lost his high-flying big city financial job due to a market crash. To pay the bills, and because there were no jobs in finance at the time, he took the first job he could get, in a chicken abattoir. Bit of a change from a desk job to slaughtering chickens, but when you have a newborn baby and bills to pay, you step up. I know that sounds crazy. It's a group of new moms that meet weekly to swap war stories about newborns, and occasionally there would be a barbecue or something that the dads would come to as well. Every time I ran into him, I was always impressed with how much he was up to speed on current events and world news. We would talk about the latest political, financial, and scientific news. There was not much discussion about chicken butchering. Turns out he was fired on his first day. Every day after that, for months, he would leave home in the morning, go to the pub, read newspapers all day, and then go home in the evening. She eventually found out they're divorced now. Why didn't he just look for a new job? Story 13. There was this kid at our church who started attending the youth group when he was about 15. Everyone loved him, but he was always a little standoffish. Fast forward 3 years to graduation time, everyone kept asking him what he planned to do after high school and if he was looking forward to it. But he always changed the subject. Finally, he revealed to one of the adults that he wasn't graduating because he hadn't been to school since he was 8 years old. His dad removed him from school and never let him return. A whole bunch of stuff went down after that, but the church members helped him do a fast-track high school degree in 3 years and have now paid for him to attend a 4-year university. That has an amazing ending. I was just wondering, how can you have an unschooled child at that age and not get caught? We live in a fairly large city. The dad just didn't re-enroll him at school and never returned. It is illegal, though, and so the dad got into a lot of legal trouble after the truth came out. The son ended up going to live with a family at the church. Story 14. Fellow grad student has 2 young kids, one that is struggling to walk and communicate and is in the process of being diagnosed. She is pulling 10 to 16-hour days between interning and classes, plus being a mom and wife. She gets a call from a friend that expresses how excited she is to see her at the husband's work party. What? She didn't RSVP, and her husband said he would pop over for less than an hour, then come home to be with her for a quiet dinner. Turns out he was bringing a date that wasn't her. They had been seeing each other for about 6 months and even had taken a trip together under the pretense of a business trip. Anytime he had been late or gone, we assumed he was with her. Friend did her a solid and took a couple pics for the divorce lawyer. Why would he bring his side chick to a party her friends attended? When we found out, we said exactly that. Pretty much wanted to get caught and end the marriage. Chefs, what are some red flags people should look out for when they go out to eat? Story 1. I'm seeing a lot of the no large menus call-outs here. For the most part, I agree. However, there are 2 late 70s restaurants here in Seattle that had very large menus, 13 Coins and Boondocks Sundeckers and Green Thumbs. Both had the open line counter and were sauté station heavy, so any number of interesting things could be done with inserts of raw ingredients and various meats, pounded veal and some garlic shallots and mushrooms, all fresh and prepped for the meal service. For one example, you can do veal parm, veal scallopini, veal piccata, veal marsala, and then use chicken breasts to repeat, but with chicken. And if you're good at your planning, it's all fresh and tasty. Have some prepped espagnole for a brown sauce base and some simple white sauce base, and then you can simplify and expand with different bits added to the sauces. My point is, a large menu is not always a negative and can be done well and not require a microwave at all. You just need a line that actually knows how to cook. It only gets scary when seafood is not your mainstay and you have a lot of different fish dishes and you're somewhere in the Midwest. Story 2. Asked my mom, who was a chef for 30 years, this is what she told me. You're better off sticking to restaurants you know are good if you can. Find a place you know is doing things right and give them your business. But if you need to find a new place, like if you just moved cities or something, order a food you know pretty well. For me, that's always the soup. Mom did soups for a good chunk of her time as a chef. If it's something you know really well, then you'll know if it's good or not. And if they do that well, then the rest of the food should probably be all right as well. But if something's wrong with your order, like it's too salty or undercooked or whatever, then there's something wrong with the restaurant. She also said that while a low price isn't indicative of a terrible restaurant, be wary of prices that are too low for the type of food they serve. A burger place shouldn't cost you more than $15 for a meal, and even that's being generous. And if your fine dining experience is running less than $10 a plate, something is wrong. Story 3. High turnover. Usually it means poor management, and that means unhappy employees. Unhappy employees means that they don't give a care about you or your food. I worked at a Pizza Hut and was on my 3rd GM. I worked there for a year at that point and was the longest working employee. The GM wasn't the best person, but he could manage the store. We didn't like him for a number of reasons. Racist, misogynistic, slept with an employee while his wife worked there, but he managed the store well and the turnover wasn't that high. Well, he got fired a couple months later and his assistant took over. Everyone liked her and wanted her to have the position, but she sucked at management. So much that we started to not like her. It was so bad. I left before it got too bad, but checked in recently and they had 13 people out of 20 quit or put in for 2 or so weeks. Management plays a big part in turnover. Not totally them as a person, but how they run the store. So bad management equals bad food. Story 4. Not a chef, but worked at a KFC for a while, so here's a KFC specific thing. There are two towel colors for cleaning use at KFC franchises, at least in American ones, no idea about the others. There are yellow towels, which are intended for surfaces that cooked foods will touch, and blue towels, which are only to be used in raw chicken areas. This is to prevent cross-contamination. Cooked chicken never touches raw chicken areas, and cooked and raw areas are never cleaned with the same towels. The thing to look out for, raw chicken areas are usually not visible from the front counter. At least in most locations I've seen. If you see a blue towel, don't eat there. Now, this isn't a hard and fast rule. I would recommend asking the cashier about it if you see anything suspicious. When I went to Europe, a KFC location in Amsterdam had blue towels and cleaning solution on top of all the trash cans in the lobby. They weren't for raw chicken, they just had a different cleaning procedure there. Story 5. Former health inspector here. If there's a self-serve soda machine, go ahead and take a napkin around the inside of the Sprite clear soda available nozzle. If your napkin comes out pink, brown, or orange, skip the soda. A Sprite nozzle should come out clear. If it's pink or orange, then it's slime mold. It's actually a bacteria, but that's what we called it. If it's brown, it's likely cola, but if the cola nozzle was put in on the Sprite dispenser and is still brown, you know the nozzles aren't being cleaned properly. Also, go ahead and look closely at the ice chute. I see green algae a lot. Edit. I knew someone would teach me something today. The slime mold is a protist, not a bacteria. Still not quite a mold. Closer to a fungus. Almost. Microbiology is rad, everyone. Edit. Or a bacteria called S. marcescens. Neato, gang. Edit 3. Maybe Rhodotorula, a yeast. This is likely what all my Subway commenters are seeing. Subway still bakes its own bread, right? Story 6. I work in a restaurant and it's freaking disgusting. I don't even know where to begin. One time the owner picked the nub of a carrot out of the garbage and told me to use it for soup. I didn't. I watched the head chef handle raw fish, pork, chicken, shrimp, all of it, wipe his hands on his apron, and start handling knives and vegetables. One time our former head chef shoved a hot dog down his throat, shot it back up, called it the hot dog trick, then served it to a child. Our former sous chef used to do it with the dishwasher in the bathroom, not his hands. The soap dispenser in the staff washroom was always empty, only the kitchen dispenser hand soap, and went back to cooking customers' food. All of this, and our restaurant is considered the best and classiest restaurant in town, with a Google Maps rating of 4.3 stars and over 200 reviews. I don't mean to ruin anyone's experience, but sometimes there are no red flags. Story 7. I wasn't a chef, just a humble stock boy, but I can say this, a good amount of hot food isn't truly kosher halal, and a lot of seemingly vegan food is not as well. 9 times out of 10, it's a result of ignorance. A skillet that made sausage during the breakfast shift might not have been washed before being used to blacken chicken or saute vegetables for lunch. Simple mistakes that can be attributed to human error and shift changes. 1 out of 10 times, it's a result of necessity and space. 2 meats might share a tray due to a lack of space. This is more a result of the menu dictating the kitchen instead of vice versa. If you live by strict voluntary dietary restrictions, dine as such. Kosher restaurants, halal restaurants, and vegan restaurants will always beat one restaurant with kosher, halal, vegan options. Story 8. Former barista and assistant manager here. If the restaurant has a coffee machine visible, take a look at the steamer. If it's covered in white, it means they don't clean after frothing the milk. Most likely they don't run steam after heating up the milk, meaning that there's residual milk inside the nozzle of the steamer, which gets burnt and generates bacteria. Don't order coffee there. Also, most likely the cloth used to clean the steamer from time to time is disgusting and used for more than just wiping the milk out of it. A restaurant with a good philosophy about health and safety cleans the coffee machine every night. Story 9. If your meat or pasta, for example, has dry spots, as if it was left out to dry for a good time, the kitchen is not properly covering or storing their prep correctly. The walk-in is most likely not taken care of. Edit for clarity. On, let's say, chicken, it's still raw. Someone leaves it out. It forms a skin looking almost jerky, chewy, and orangish yellow color. That spot won't go away because someone has cooked it. Same kind of thing with pasta, but the pasta is always pre-cooked, waiting for you. There is no reason for your sensitive products to be left uncovered for that long. Story 10. Don't be the first table, don't be the last table. In fact, never be the last table. We've all been here for hours in a hot, smoky kitchen without breaks, and you'd like entrees and mains 5 minutes before closing. Dude, your meal isn't getting looked after, it's getting fired as quickly as possible. If you're interested in the special, have it Monday. That's a waste. That's getting reheated. Skip if it's midweek. If you want a burger, go to a burger bar. If you want tapas, go somewhere Spanish, etc. Don't turn up at an Italian place and ask for French dressing. Story 11. You might have to be a chef to recognize this, but my red flag is going into a busy restaurant and noticing none of the tables have food, or not many customers are yet eating. This usually means the kitchen is going down in flames. One time I noticed this and could see some food slowly stacking up in the window, but no orders coming out. I mentioned it to the server and he replied, "I wouldn't suggest ordering food." He brought our drink check and we left. He was tipped well for his honesty. Story 12. I've worked as a server in 5 busy Tyson's Corner, Virginia restaurants, and personally, I never want to eat out ever. A slow restaurant is serving old or bad food, and a busy restaurant does not clean anything well enough. When people are not being paid a living wage, don't trust them with your life. The ease and convenience of going out to eat comes with so much more than just a high price. No $2 an hour employee or 16-hour-a-day employee will care as much about your health and well-being as you do. Story 13. I've worked for many restaurants and been to many others. If the place has low lighting, unless it's intentional, roughly no customer activity, floors aren't clean, place smells bad, booth seats move, drinks that taste funny, not a drug joke, this is a sign that they don't clean their soda fountains or tea urns, and low quality customer service are all signs that you should look out for it if you're going to eat there. If a restaurant is poorly maintained, the food might not be of good quality either. Story 14. If you can smell the fryer from outside the building, get back in your car and drive on. If they don't maintain the fryer oil, they don't deep clean it at all. Nifty tip, if you have to go to the bathroom soon after you eat, you have low-level food poisoning. Now think of the last place you ate that didn't happen. That's a good restaurant. Sadly, they are truly few and far between. That's how Gordon Ramsay made so many episodes of Kitchen Nightmares. Teachers, what's the funniest answer you've gotten from a student that technically wasn't wrong? Story 1. Not a teacher, but a witness. In high school history class, the teacher asked, what was the peace treaty that ended World War II? This was a trick question because there wasn't a single treaty that ended the war. This one kid blurted out, the Manhattan Project. The teacher laughed so hard, he went and got the other history teacher and had the kid tell him the answer too. This reminds me of high school when I had this pretty attractive history teacher. She was talking about jewels or something at a museum, and I blurted out, "Mrs. Blank, can I show you some real nice jewels?" And everyone burst out laughing, and the teacher got very red and flustered and embarrassed, and I looked confused because I meant I would show her big diamonds and rubies, like to jokingly woo her. But the class and the teachers took it as if I was referring to my genitals. Story time. In high school, we had a history teacher that everyone insisted was perverted, but I never saw it. So I was all, "You guys are crazy, he's fine." Being the immature sophomore that I was part of the group of friends who would just poke each other in the side at inopportune times, for the lulz or something. A friend of mine, let's call her D, could not control her reactions to save her life. We were sitting next to each other in the middle of the front row. I reached to poke D, who then lets out a short but really high-pitched "eep" in front of the class. The teacher looks me dead in the eyes and says in a very loud and frustrated teacher voice, "Relatively objective, stop fingering D." For years, I insisted that it was unfortunate wordplay, but then I finally concluded, hey, maybe he knew how that was going to be taken. Story 2. Not a teacher, but I remember something I did when I was in grade 2. The student teacher took us into a private room one by one for eye exams. I've never taken an eye exam before, and it wasn't really explained to me what was happening. I was just sat down and asked to read the first line of the chart, then the second, then the third. By the time it came to the fourth line, I was like, "It's too small for me to read. 1 minute, please." Then I got up, walked over to the board, and started reading the letters. Apparently that's not how you do eye exams. Similar thing happened to me. They took us into a room to test our eyes, so I left my glasses in the classroom. After a couple lines, they recommended glasses, so I went and grabbed them. They looked at me like I was crazy. "Hey man, you wanted to test my eyes, not my glasses." I did the same thing. I had an awful eye doctor who messed up my prescription, so for years I could see better without my glasses than with them. The school decided to test us one day, and I couldn't see the board out of my really bad eye, let alone any letters. They proceeded to chew me out about not wearing my glasses and wouldn't let me explain. Story 3. I've got a story from my fiance's childhood. They were testing her intelligence, or awareness, and showed her an image with a TV in a room. The TV was turned on, showing a cartoon, and had a plant on top of it. Question: what's on the television? Answer: a plant. Apparently, she just kept insisting in utter frustration until the administrator bothered to look at the image and not the answer sheet. Reminds me of a friend's story. I don't know about public schools, but for sure at private schools, you get a little quiz-type test with a teacher before they confirm you're ready for kindergarten. One of the things he had to do was identify pictures. He aced the section except for the picture of the airplane. He looked and thought hard, and then burst into tears, saying, I don't know what that is. Turns out his dad worked for Boeing, and he was trying and failing to discern exactly what model plane the super generic picture was depicting. During a similar test, I was completely sure the color I was supposed to identify was dark blue, not black. I was so insistent that the tester got a few other people to look at it, and they decided that it really was a very dark blue. Story 4. Another story you guys might like from the same classroom was going over tastes and food-related descriptions. I brought up the word sticky and gave some examples, then asked if any of the 35-plus students could think of more foods that are sticky. One quieter kid raised their hand, and with the most serious look on their face, "Come." Me. What was that? Mortified. Student. Come. Me. No idea what to do or say. Another student. Teacher, come. Made chewing motion with mouth. Me finally realizing that they were saying gum because the G and CK often sound the same to Koreans. Yes, gum, right. I laughed for the 10 whole minute break after that class and still have no idea how I didn't while in front of the room. I did the same thing when I was little and still not fluent in English. Teacher said, which phrases can you make with a beat? She was looking for something like beat up or beat at. I was reading a lot of stuff in English on the internet and said, without thinking much, beat the crap out of it. So proud of such a long phrase I had achieved. I was sent out of class. Story 5. Elementary school kid saw the answer key. He swore he came up with answers may vary all on his own. What's sad is when I had to grade a first semester chemistry test once at university that was made for the medical students. I don't remember if the medical students were in the first semester too. They just took the test together with the first semester chemistry students, but had an alternative version anyway. Thing is, the grading sheet with the right answers was leaked beforehand. One student wrote the correct answer down and then wrote 1 point for every correct formula underneath. How do you finish school without walking in front of a car if you are that darn stupid? In high school, classes were in Spanish. A teacher was angry about people copy-pasting online material for homework. She claimed one essay even contained a click here if you want to know more about Tutankhamun. One of my classmates started laughing, and the teacher told him, you shouldn't be laughing. You didn't even realize your essay was in Portuguese. I wish I was making this up. Story 6. In a class that deals with electricity, I asked the students to name a good conductor. Leonard Bernstein. As a music teacher, this brings me great joy. That's great. It starts with an earthquake. Asked, what is the moral of the story? The little engine that could. Answered, don't pick up hitchhikers. To refresh your memory, the engine had trouble getting up the hill because he had taken on several more passengers due to their train breaking down. Also the moral, perseverance, believe in yourself, don't give up. If I've learned anything from TV, it's that if you pick up a hitchhiker, they're either a red rummer, a ghost, or a hoopy frood. Story 7. Not a teacher, but someone told me this. What side of the road do people in France drive on? Miss, they drive on both sides. Oh man, this reminds me of the time I tried to find an elevator at the Louvre. I found one, but it only went to lower levels, and I was trying to go up a level. I saw some museum employees and asked if they knew where there was an elevator to go up. They took me to the same elevator. I was confused and asked, but does it go up? They were like, yes, elevators go up and down. Rolled their eyes and walked away. They drive on the right side, technically correct everywhere. Story 8. I teach forensic science. We were going to be using iodine to fume fingerprints. Iodine vapor is no joke, so I terrify the students and use only 2 volunteers with goggles and respirators at the chemical hood. But we still all go over the MSDS, PPE, and equipment. I spent maybe 5 minutes talking about everything, and the chemical hood to my class of 30. Towards the end, so someone asked me, what is a hood? A hand shoots up. Yes, student. It's like the place where you grow up. I facepalm. The class laughs, and I'm unable to pivot his answer at the moment. He's on the autism spectrum and wasn't trying to be funny. Story 9. The question: a man has to get a fox, a chicken, and a sack of corn across a river. He has a rowboat, and it can only carry him and one other thing. If the fox and the chicken are left together, the fox will eat the chicken. If the chicken and the corn are left together, the chicken will eat the corn. How does the man do it? Students answer: let the chicken eat the corn and let the fox eat the chicken, then bring the fox over. The question is, why does the cabbage require a single spot? Is this a survival game, or is it one very large cabbage? Story 10. Teaching English in Korea goes over vocabulary words. Dozen, egg family. Same kid a month or so later. Evolution, monkey level up. Reminds me of an anecdote I heard in another thread. An Asian guy was grocery shopping in America, but couldn't remember the English word for chicken. To remedy the situation, he grabbed an egg, walked up to a cashier, held up the egg and asked, "Where is mother?" As someone who once stood at a butcher shop mooing at the meat in an attempt to get them to understand I wanted to buy beef when I didn't know so much as the word cow, I totally respect this dude. Story 11. Okay, so this story totally doesn't translate to English, but I'll give it a shot anyway. In German, there's this little drawing game called Das Haus vom Nikolaus, consisting of drawing a house without lifting the pen or drawing the same line twice. Well, the act of drawing something without lifting your pen is called in einem Zug zeigen, which literally translates to drawing in a train. So yes, one kid actually drew a house on a train. We have the same game in America, but I don't think it's called anything in English. Impossible puzzle. Only 0.00001% of people can solve this. Can you? Story 12. I wrote an exam where the question was, can you name 3 models of DNA replication? She wrote, no. I mean, that was a bad question writing on your part. For those saying that something like name 3 types of DNA replication would still result in the student writing no, you should recognize that this is equivalent to leaving the question blank with the original wording. It was a valid answer to the question, it's not a valid response to the above rewording. It was so, and I realized it after I saw her response. I was like, well, I guess I could have worded that differently. Story 13. I worked in a special needs class for a year, and there was one kid with a textbook case of Asperger's syndrome. Very bright, very tough nut to crack. I tried to tell him a corny joke once, and he was not having it. Why did the chicken cross the road? He likely had business over there, or was compelled by force. Well, okay, easily my favorite memory of that class. My friend is also autistic, has led to similar punchlines to the classic corny jokes. Why don't people play poker in the jungle? Because the undiscovered tribes who inhabit the jungles have had no contact with Western culture. Therefore, they would never have heard of any game called poker, let alone know how to play it. Reminds me of Louis C.K.'s daughter. Story 14. On a 3rd grade Charlotte's Web quiz, give 2 pieces of evidence that support this statement. Charlotte was a good friend to Wilbur. She comforted him, and she didn't let him become a pig. You know what I don't get about that story? Why is the pig the one who becomes famous? The real news is the freaking super genius spider who knows how to think critically and write in English. Who cares what it thinks about the pig? I want to know his thoughts on the origins of reality. Thank God we don't live in a world where talentless pigs hog the limelight. Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of this video and have a wonderful day. Story 15. Teaching grade 5, students were fooling around during group work, so I said sarcastically, "Do I need to stand here and watch you do your work?" To which the student responded even more sarcastically, "Well, you don't have to stand, you can grab the chair and sit." I can't remember which grade it was, but probably 2nd or 3rd. Teacher was asking something relatively simple, and no one wanted to or knew the answer. What's going on here? There should be hands up like trees in the forest. Maybe this is a logging area, said the joker of our class. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.